The cafe was quiet that rainy evening, the kind of night when the streets glisten under the soft glow of street lamps, and the sound of raindrops becomes a steady lullaby. The few people inside sat wrapped in their own little worlds. A student hunched over a laptop, a couple whispering over dessert, and an older man reading a newspaper. Near the fogged window, a small table held two figures that didn't quite belong to the comfortable hum of the place. A woman in her early 30s sat there, stirring a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold, her eyes fixed on nothing, her mind clearly elsewhere. Across from her, a little girl about 6 years old had her knees tucked on the chair, her small hands pressed against the glass as she watched the raindrops chase each other down the pane. Her hair was tied into two ponytails, uneven but adorable, and her face carried a curious mix of innocence and quiet longing. The door chimed as it opened, letting in a rush of cold air and the faint smell of rain-soaked streets. Alexander Reed stepped inside, brushing a few droplets from the shoulders of his dark tailored coat. To most people, his name was synonymous with wealth, power, and the kind of influence that could change the fate of entire companies with a single decision. As the CEO of one of the country's most powerful corporations, he was known for his sharp mind and colder heart. A man who didn't bend, didn't pause, and certainly didn't let emotions cloud his judgment. But here, in this unremarkable little cafe, he wasn't thinking about board meetings or million-dollar deals. He was simply looking for a moment of warmth before returning to his sprawling penthouse, a place that, despite all its grandeur, felt impossibly empty. As he walked past the tables, his gaze lingered briefly on the small girl by the window. She turned from the rain just as he passed, and their eyes met. There was no hesitation in her expression, no shyness, just a curious recognition, as if she had been waiting for him. Before Alexander could process it, she slipped off her chair, padded over to him on small sneakers, and tugged at the hem of his coat. When he looked down, she tilted her head and asked in the softest, most serious voice, "Can you be my daddy for one night?" The words hit him like a sudden gust of wind, knocking the breath from his lungs. He froze, staring at her, his mind momentarily blank. It was such an unusual, raw request, so painfully earnest that it bypassed all the guarded layers he kept around himself. For a moment, the background noise of the cafe seemed to fade, and all he could see were those wide brown eyes looking up at him with hope and something else, something achingly familiar. Before he could answer, the woman from the window table, clearly the girl's mother, hurried over, her face flushing with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly, placing a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "She didn't mean that. She just says things sometimes." Her voice was tired, the kind of tired that goes beyond needing sleep. She tried to coax her daughter back toward their table, but Alexander, still crouched in that moment of surprise, found himself kneeling down to the girl's level instead. "Why would you want me to be your daddy?" he asked, his voice quieter now, almost hesitant. The little girl hesitated, her small fingers twisting in the hem of her sweater. She glanced up at her mother, then back at him. "Because all the other kids have their daddies at the school play tomorrow," she said finally, her voice wavering but determined. "And Mommy says mine is in heaven now. But if I had one just for one night, maybe I wouldn't feel so lonely." Her words cut through him like a knife. Alexander felt an unfamiliar tightness in his throat, the kind he hadn't felt in years. In that instant, something inside him cracked open, because in her innocent request, he heard echoes of his own past. A past he had spent years trying to bury under the weight of his work. He had once been a husband, excited to become a father, ready to trade in late nights at the office for late nights rocking a newborn to sleep. But fate had stolen that future from him in the form of a car accident that took both his wife and their unborn child. Ever since, he had locked away any thought of family, telling himself he didn't need anyone, that connections only led to pain. And yet, here was this small stranger, unknowingly pulling those memories back to life, standing in front of him with a request so impossibly pure that he didn't know how to respond. He could see the faint resemblance of someone he once loved in her face, not in her exact features, but in the warmth of her gaze, in the way she spoke without fear. Her mother gave another apology, clearly uncomfortable with the moment. "Sir, please don't mind her. She's just a little girl. She doesn't understand." But Alexander shook his head slightly, still looking at the child. "No," he said softly, almost to himself. She understands more than you think. For a long second, the three of them just stood there. The little girl holding her breath, the mother uncertain, and the man who had everything in the world yet nothing that truly mattered, realizing that he was in danger of feeling again. When Alexander finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that surprised even him. "If it's all right with your mom," he said slowly, "I'd be honored to come to your school play." The girl's eyes lit up instantly, the kind of joy that seemed too big for her small frame, and she threw her arms around his neck in an impulsive hug. Alexander froze for a moment before his arms, almost instinctively, wrapped around her. In that embrace something shifted, something that felt dangerously like healing. He didn't know then what this night would lead to, or how much it would change him. All he knew was that for the first time in years, he wasn't walking away from someone who needed him. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, that felt like the most important choice he had made in a very long time. Alexander Reed had spent years perfecting the art of keeping people at arm's length. He was the man who could close multi-million-dollar deals without blinking, who could walk into a boardroom and command silence with nothing more than his presence. He was known for being calculated, precise, and untouchable. But beneath the sharp suits and polished speeches was a man who hadn't truly let himself feel in a very long time. There was a reason for that, one he never spoke of, one that lurked quietly in the shadows of his otherwise controlled life. Years ago, he had been someone entirely different. He had been in love, deeply and unshakably. Her name was Emily, and she was the kind of person who made a room warmer just by stepping into it. She could soften his stubborn edges, make him laugh until his chest ached, and remind him that life was more than stock prices and deadlines. They had been married for just over a year when she told him she was pregnant. He still remembered the way she'd held the pregnancy test with trembling hands, her eyes brimming with joy. He'd thought then that nothing could ever bring him more happiness. He had promised himself he would be there for every moment. The ultrasounds, the baby kicks, the late-night cravings. But fate had other plans. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Emily had gone out to run a few errands, and he had stayed behind, buried in work as always. He had been reviewing a contract when the phone call came, the kind that splits your life into before and after. A car accident. Instant. No chance to say goodbye. Both Emily and their unborn child were gone. The world, in that moment, stopped making sense. Grief had a way of changing people, and Alexander's grief turned him into stone. He told himself that loving someone only led to unbearable loss. He buried himself in his work, convinced that if he kept busy enough, he could keep the pain at bay. He traded laughter for late nights at the office, warmth for the cold security of isolation. He built an empire not just out of ambition, but as a fortress, a way to keep the world out in his memories locked safely away where they couldn't hurt him. That night in the cafe, when the little girl approached him, he didn't expect any of this to come rushing back. At first, it was just her voice, small, hesitant but unafraid, asking, "Can you be my daddy for one night?" He thought he had misheard her. But when he looked into her eyes, something inside him shifted. They weren't Emily's eyes, but there was something in them, that same unguarded sincerity, that same way of looking at someone as though they mattered more than anything in the room. When she told him her own father was in heaven now, it was like a door he'd kept bolted for years creaked open. The weight in her words wasn't something a child her age should have to carry, and yet she did, much like he had carried his own. She was asking for something so simple, so innocent, yet it hit him with the force of everything he had lost. For her, it was a request for a companion in a moment when she would otherwise feel left out and forgotten. For him, it was a reminder of a life he had once imagined, the kind of life he had been preparing for before it was ripped away. He realized then that their pain, though different, shared the same shape. She had lost the father she should have had. He had lost the chance to be one. And in that strange, unexpected symmetry, a thread connected them. It wasn't just pity he felt for her. It was recognition. She was, in a way, a reflection of the hollow space in his own heart. Her mother's embarrassed apologies barely registered as he studied the little girl. In her presence, he could feel emotions he had locked away pushing against the surface. He saw not just her loneliness, but the bravery it took for her to approach a stranger and ask for what she needed. He thought about how, when Emily had been alive, She used to tell him that children were unafraid to dream big, because they didn't yet know how to fear disappointment. Looking at this little girl, Alexander could see that truth so clearly. She knew the risk of asking, but she asked anyway. He had lived so long avoiding connection because it meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain. But now, faced with this tiny stranger, he was struck by how different it felt when that connection wasn't about romance or business or obligation. It was about showing up for someone simply because they needed you. And for the first time in years, he wondered if maybe there was still some part of him capable of being more than a CEO, more than a solitary man defined by his losses. When she hugged him after he agreed to come to her school play, it was as if she had unlocked something deep inside him, a feeling he had thought was gone forever. The warmth of her tiny arms around his neck, the trust in her gesture, reminded him of what it meant to be needed in the simplest, purest way. It wasn't just about her request anymore. It was about what saying yes could mean for both of them. He had no way of knowing it at the time, but that moment was the start of something that would challenge everything he thought he knew about himself. In her, he saw the shadow of the family he had lost, but also the possibility of a different future. One not built on the cold safety of distance, but on the fragile, beautiful risk of letting someone in again.